Everyone, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. This is Chris Petri bringing you some great tidbits and tips for watercolor. Today we're going to talk about palettes, and the first thing I always say to any of my students is knowledge is power. So get as much knowledge as you can, whatever you're trying to learn about, whether it's your palette, your paints, your paper, techniques, favorite artists. Always knowledge is power. So as much knowledge as you can gain in any one area of your painting and your artwork, all the better. So today we're talking about palettes, and I had a great question from one of my subscribers, Judy. She asked about my palette. How do I approach painting with my palette and the paints, and how much water, how much paint? So I'm glad to give you guys just a quick little informational here on the way I approach my palette and how I work with my palette. So guys and gals, here we go. First, I have a little checklist here. I'm always using checklists in my everyday job, and then when I do my watercolors, I use checklists. And the first thing I have here is a metal palette. I like metal palettes for many reasons. I find it's more easy to mix on metal palettes. I find that metal palettes don't stain, so when I wipe off the watercolor paints and water, it stays fresh and clean and white, just like this. I notice on some of my plastic over the years painting, my plastic palettes tend to get stained with certain colors, and they sometimes can have a staining effect on the plastic, which actually will affect the way I'm seeing my colors on my palette. So I'd rather have a fresh, clean, bright white backdrop for my paints as I'm mixing them, my watercolor paints. Versus having some sort of maybe colors on the plastic that might affect the way I'm seeing my colors. So that's why my favorite reason I use metal palettes, besides I think they're just more interesting to use. There seems to be more varieties with metal boxes. So my second thing on the list is moist wet paint. Here you can see on my palette I have a lot of fresh squeezed moist wet paint, and that's a key for watercolor painting. And my technique, of course, these are my favorite ideas and tips on watercolor painting. Every artist is different, every watercolor artist is different, so you just go with what you think works best for you. Try all the different techniques and all the different ideas, and you'll find that works great, to just be always gaining more knowledge and trying different things in your artwork. So here we can see nice fresh moist paint. I clean off my brush with a little bit of water, and we can go into some more, go into some red. Nice freshly squeezed out of the tube paint. And that's really, when you go to paint onto your paper, you're going to have really beautiful, clean, bright, vibrant color if you use nice, fresh, moist paint. Whereas if you go into a palette, let's say you keep your palette and it's been sitting there for 2 weeks, and then you go to paint and you don't have fresh, moist paint, when you try to get vibrant, beautiful colors onto your paper, it's going to be really difficult, because there's no, with dry watercolor paints that are not freshly moist and freshly squeezed out of the tube, we can't get that vibrant look we're looking for. So what we'll wind up having is a lot of very dull looking colors without any real powerful tonal value and vibrancy. So this is the reason why we use freshly squeezed paint, because that's about all we can really get with dry paints if we're just going in and trying to use what's here, which is dry. And this is what we get when we have nice, beautiful, fresh squeezed paint, nice, moist, wet paints. So we can incorporate that into our paintings. Okay, another idea on palettes is cleaning the palette while painting. as you paint, your palette is going to have colors all mixing and mingling and maybe making some unpleasant colors here and there. Sometimes there are some beautiful colors that are created when your palette has a lot of paint and water on it. But for the most part, if you want to keep nice, vibrant, clean colors on your watercolor paper, then once things start to get mixed up on the palette and it starts to get a little muddy like this on the palette, it all depends on what you're painting, of course, too. Sometimes a nice, beautiful mixture like that can look good, but the point is, when you're trying to achieve a certain look in your painting, always remember that whatever's on your palette, that's going to be what it looks like on your painting. So here, I would, come in and take some paper towels. I always have paper towels on hand really quickly, and I always just clean up my palette quick as I'm painting. Maybe if I'm doing a painting, or maybe a 8x12 painting, I might clean my palette 2-3 times as I'm painting. So I have a nice, fresh, clean spot to work on. And then I can just get back to nice, fresh, clean, vibrant colors. And then we're back to some nice, vibrant, beautiful pigment and color. So cleaning the palette's great. Paper towels work the best. I trim them down a little bit with my scissors to make them more convenient to use. And then next we say, let's see our palette as a painting. So let's, as a watercolor artist, let's think of our palette actually as our paper, as our painting. So whatever we're looking at down here on our palette, that's essentially what's going to be showing up on our canvas, our painting, our watercolor paper, let's say. I had this insight the other day while thinking about this, making this video, and I thought that was the most simple way to really explain it. Is our palette really is, in essence, most of the time, what our painting is, our finished work. So whatever's your paints are looking like here on your palette, that is what's going to be transferred over to the watercolor paper. And our next item on the list is storing palette with care. Everyone, storing the palette is important. I will give you my best tip on storing my watercolor palette. What I do is, when I'm done painting, I fold it up and I put it into a baggie, like a Ziploc baggie. But before I do that, I just wet a sponge, dampen a sponge a little bit, or dampen some paper towels a little bit, and I just put them in the palette before I close it up, and then I put it in a bag, and that tends to keep the paints moist. So if you paint like once a week on the weekends, or every couple days, that works great, and it keeps your paints moist. And if you have to, another tip here is I like to spritz the paint with a small spray bottle. Before I paint, maybe a half an hour before, I just go in and do a nice little spritz of the paint, and that also moistens up the paints. But the point is to definitely often squeeze new paints into your palette. That seems to work great. What do you think? This way you can always get that great, nice, moist paint, which is the nice, fresh, vibrant colors you're looking for. And then the last thing I will always encourage everybody is try different palettes. Try different ones. Try plastic ones. Try metal palettes. When you try different things, you learn about them, and then you say, well, I like the metal palette for this reason. I like the plastic palette for that reason. Maybe you like to use both. I do use I use both plastic and metal, but mostly 90% of the time I use my metal box. But I do sometimes use plastic, especially with like a larger watercolor painting. I find some of the plastic boxes have a little bit larger working areas, which works good for like a larger painting. And then I guess another interesting idea here with mixing nice, vibrant, juicy paints is the effect you can get on your paintings. So let's take a look here. Again, I'm always keen to just clean my palette quickly. And then let's say we're going to go in and do some flowers here. We'll just do some simple blue. And then I check my brush on some tissue to get some of the water. So I would say another great tip with using the palette and paints is always keeping a good monitoring your brush and how much water's in your brush. So when you go into your water supply, you can always check a little bit of water off your brush, just so you're not getting too much water. It all depends on what look you're looking for on your painting. So I'll put some blue, some yellow ochre, some alizarin crimson, maybe a little bit of purple. And then I'll clean my brush frequently, tap off a little bit of excess water. Okay, so now I'm starting to use a little more water and letting the paints mingle a little bit as I go through my... Okay, now's about the time I would go back in with some paper towel. I'm going to be using the same colors over and over in this painting, 3 or 4 colors, so I don't have to worry about losing track. I always know the same colors I'm using. Go back in, get some more freshly squeezed paint. Checking the water off. Go into some green. And then now I'm going to work into some fresh paint again, fresh squeezed out of the tube paint. Clean my brush a little bit, tap off some water, a little more water. Check off some water here on the paper towel. A little bit of blue, a little bit of shadow colors here. I'm thinking the light's going to be coming from this direction, from the right. I'm using a reference photo for my flowers here. Just a couple little flower ideas on the watercolor paper to help me work out this simple sketch here, this little small composition. Okay, so that's the idea of using nice fresh squeezed tube paint, getting lots of nice beautiful colors onto the paper. When things get a little bit watery and